Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. So for today's video, I've rounded up kind of a combination of like the most commonly asked questions that I get when it comes to newly engaged couples planning their wedding, and just overall what I see as the most common things that couples have no idea about when it comes to planning your wedding and kind of like the beginning stages of wedding planning, so that hopefully you will not be one of them. So obviously, most people watching this video, if you're planning a wedding, it's probably the first time you've ever been put in this position. And if you haven't been involved in a lot of wedding plans of friends or family members, or just have no idea what goes into planning a wedding, then this is probably going to be a topic that resonates with you and relatable on most of these things. So as somebody that has worked in the wedding industry for over a decade now, I sometimes forget that a lot of these things are not just like common knowledge and things that couples are expected to know or have the knowledge of going into wedding planning. So I think it's good to kind of check in and remember that we are all starting from somewhere. So number one of the most common things couples are somewhat clueless about is the kind of the timeline of booking and hiring wedding vendors. So on average, I would say most wedding timelines from the time of getting engaged until the actual wedding day is typically about 12 months. I would say a year, 10 to 16 months is probably like the most common timeline, and what I would recommend as a timeline from the time you get engaged to your wedding date. This way you are giving yourself enough time to book out vendors, but also not, having a super long engagement if that's not something that you want. However, I will say the wedding industry has kind of gotten crazy over the recent years, and vendors are booking out a lot further in advance than they ever used to. So longer engagements are not a bad thing, and if you are on the shorter side or less than a year, right around a year, you pretty much want to be booking your vendors somewhat immediately. So venue, caterer, florals, photographer, those should all be booked pretty much boom, 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 right away, so that you're making sure that you are locking in any vendors that you really love and really want for your wedding day. Now, a lot of online resources still show booking like your hair and makeup and desserts and stuff like that as soon as 3 or 4 months before your wedding date, and those are just pretty outdated at this point. So within 6 months of your wedding date, you should have all of your main vendors booked. Number two, hiring an officiant or just overall wedding ceremony plans. I think this is one of those pieces that you don't really think about the wedding ceremony part. I think there's so many details that go into the wedding reception and the decor and all of that, and most of your vendors that you're booking are for the more of the reception aspect of your wedding. But obviously you have to have a wedding ceremony, and if you're not having a wedding inside of a church or something where a religious entity is performing your wedding, this has to be something that you are going to create. So make sure that you are thinking about, who's going to actually perform our wedding, whether that's a family member or a friend that you're going to ask to get ordained. You will need to come up with some kind of a script or program for your wedding ceremony. That doesn't just magically happen. Number three is the cost of flowers. This is something that always catches couples by surprise. Flowers add up very quickly, yes. So if you're trying to budget out things and you have no idea what to expect when it comes to certain aspects, make sure that you're doing a little bit of research for what's common in your area and kind of what you're looking for and what average costs for that vendor are. I actually just recently did a video all about breaking down a wedding budget and kind of the most common ranges for each piece of your wedding and different wedding vendors. So if you are somebody that has no idea what to expect when it comes to the cost of different pieces of your wedding, definitely check that video out, and that'll be super helpful for you. On the topic of flowers too, something that I find couples just don't really ever think about until they're asked this question. Almost every floral consult that I sit in with my clients, when the topic of personal flowers comes up, this is something that they haven't really thought about, which I don't know why that's always surprising to me. But personal flowers refers to obviously a bridal bouquet, bridesmaids bouquets, boutonnieres for the groomsmen and or officiants or parents. I feel like the parent flowers are the one thing that's like just completely not thought of until it's asked by the florist. So if you are having any parents that are being included in your wedding processional or even just for photos, parent flowers are typically a boutonniere for the men and a wrist corsage for the women. I have found that older women still, like a grandma, still likes the pin-on corsages, so this is just something to ask what their preference might be, or if you have a personal preference as far as how you want those to be displayed. But typically, obviously bridal party members, so bridesmaids, groomsmen will typically have bouquets or boutonnieres for the men. Not everyone though, so if that's not something that you care about, then you don't have to have these items. Additionally, usually like an officiant, if it's a family member or a friend, will have a matching whatever corsage boutonniere depending on who that individual is, as well as parents that are walking down the aisle, whether that is walking with one of the couples, so whether you or your partner are walking down with parents, they will typically have some form of personal flowers, whether that is like a posy bouquet or a wrist corsage or a pin-on corsage or a pin-on boutonniere. As well as if you are having siblings outside of the wedding party walking down the aisle, grandparents walking down the aisle, aunts, uncles, anybody in addition to the actual wedding party that will be participating in some form in your wedding ceremony will typically have some kind of personal flower. So just think about that when you are kind of talking through all of the counts and what you're going to need specifically from florists. Next is the marriage license process. So this is very common to not know anything about if you've never gone through the process. It can be a little bit tricky too, and there's a little bit of nuance and it might vary depending on where you're located. But I did do a video all about marriage licenses, so I won't go too far into that today. So if you want more information, I'll link that above and definitely check that out. That's going to answer pretty much, hopefully, all of your questions in regards to the marriage license process, because this is something you absolutely don't want to forget about, of course. Next is the wedding dress shopping timeline. I also own a bridal boutique, as you can see all these wedding dresses behind me. And again, as somebody that's been in this industry for over a decade, I sometimes forget that people don't know that it's not like you can just order a dress and it's going to come quickly, or you can walk in and buy a dress and not have to worry about the timing of it. So usually like 6 to 9 months is kind of the shortest amount of time you want to have when it comes to wedding dress shopping. My store here, most dresses come in within 4 to 6 months, but you want to make sure that you're giving yourself time for alterations. Some stores have a lead time of as far as a year from the time you order a dress to the time that it is produced and shows up in the store. So make sure that you are understanding that that will take some time, so don't leave that to the last minute, and make sure that you're giving yourself enough time that you're going to be able to go a couple times if you want to, or be able to sleep on it and not feel rushed to make a decision or stressed about is it going to show up on time. And finally, another thing that I find couples kind of forget about or don't think through the process of is the setting up and tear down / bussing of your table's settings. So I think most people go to a wedding and this isn't really something that you think about. It just happens, right? So if you are booking a full service caterer, then typically this will all be included. So if you're having a caterer that's doing a plated meal, they're providing your place settings, this is all taken care of. If you are not hiring a full service caterer, you will likely need to not only source and rent the table settings that you will have on the table, plates, flatware, glassware, etc., but you will also need to have a plan for where those are going to go after dinner is served. So if you aren't having a plated meal, even if you're just having a buffet meal, you're not going to have, if you don't have a full service caterer with busing staff, where are those items going to go? Who's going to clean that up? Who's going to pack it up at the end of the night? And you need to make sure that you have a plan for this and that you have talked through this with whoever's supplying your food and whoever's going to be on site to be able to achieve this seamlessly. Don't expect your guests to clean up after themselves. Even with disposable plates, a lot of times they will not throw them away themselves. They'll end up on the table. So make sure that you are chatting through this and that you have a plan in place for not only setting up the table setting items, but also cleaning them up after dinner as well. So these are just some of the most common things that I find couples go into wedding planning completely clueless about, and hopefully having this information will give you a little bit more knowledge and some confidence when entering the wedding planning process. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.